Good day and welcome to Set Free with Elder Dr. Sharon Apupa, a show designed to do what Jesus did, meet you at your point of need and set you free through the truth of His Word. Today's show will focus on sex, scandals, and the Bible. The story of Noah and his sons. Now here's your host, Dr. Sharon Apupa.
Good day and welcome to Set Free with Elder Dr. Sharon Apupa, a word-based show designed to speak to the practical challenges of everyday living. My resident panelists will be Elder Sheldon Fox, Elder Esther Trott, Deaconess Nancy Talbot Hawks, and Sister Lene Wells. Now, I know that many people have heard of the show Scandal. Well, panelists, wouldn't you say, having read and prepared for this show, that there's more juicy scandals in the Bible than there are on this show? Those scandals?
Amen.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Can anybody share with the audience what are some of the things that you found most amazing as you searched the scriptures for this preparation?
Well, one thing I could say that there's nothing new under the sun.
Absolutely.
What we're worrying about today happening, whether it be with our young people, our middle age, or our older ones, happened back then as well. So to me, it's a circle going round and round.
And to piggyback on Elder Trott's statement, everything you need to know is in God's Word, so is the solution. So even though we have lots of scandals, you can find the solution in God's Word.
Good word.
Amen. Amen.
Definitely.
So our first series is called Sex, Scandals, and the Bible. One of the things we found out as we've gone through life is that many people think that their lives have been too terrible or they've done things that are just so bad that God wouldn't want them. Did many of you experience that?
Yes.
You know, I heard people say that, I've done such a big sin. Now, I don't know where they got that from because somehow I don't see big and little sins in the Bible, but they think they've done such a big sin that God doesn't want them or God can use them or God can change them. But we've come to let you know through this next 8 weeks that there is nothing impossible for God. Amen. And that whatever it is that you've been through in your life, wherever you see yourself at this moment on your life's journey, that God is able to turn your life around. Now, this first week, we're going to be looking at the scandal of a son who exposes his father's nakedness. And it's going to be dealing with how we as children deal with the humanness of our parents. Now, to set the stage, when you get up some days and you're reading the newspaper and you're looking to see what's going on and the headline is usually what catches your eye? Well, we're going to read for you the headline in the Bible that's going to set the stage for this story. And the headline is found in Genesis chapter 9, and we're going to read verses 19 through 25. And they read, "These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And when Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his young son had done unto him, he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." Wow. What a story, what a story. Has anybody on this panel ever seen your parents' nakedness? Now, hold up a minute. I'm not talking about the physiology now. I'm talking about getting to a point in your life where you discovered that your parents were human beings too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of what's going on in this story. And so we're going to start for the public by giving an overview of Noah and his family because, we've got to put it into context. Tell us what was going on, Elder Fox, in this story.
Well, certainly most people have heard of Noah. We know that it's one of the early stories told in the Bible in Genesis. And he was a man who lived over 900 years. He did a lot of things. He did a lot of things for the Lord. Even in the New Testament, in Hebrews, there is a place in Hebrews where Noah is one of the first men identified in the Hall of Fame, if you will, of men of the Bible. And so we know that Noah is a significant man. Now, we also know that he did a number of things during his life. One of the things God called upon him to do was to build a ship on dry land. He probably is the first shipbuilder. And I think just as today when a ship is launched, there's a great deal of excitement. Well, there was some excitement when he built that ship on dry land. And so he then populated the earth. And so there are a number of things we know about Noah. I think whether we're Christian or whether we're non-Christian, most people have heard of the story, some story of Noah. We're certainly going to dig tonight into some interesting stories that many people would not have known of Noah.
So I just want to hang here for a little bit, because if I remember hearing this Bible story when I was going to bed all the time, it was said that Noah was a man of great faith, that people were ridiculing him and saying, nobody's ever seen rain, what in the world are you talking about? But he had heard a word from God, and he acted on that word.
Yes.
Not only that, but he made sure that his family as well honored the word of God. And so he was a really, really outstanding man.
Yes.
And then he went into the ark, and what happened? Can I tell a little bit more? Because he built the boat, it wasn't raining. They ran into the ark, it wasn't raining. And
That's right.
tell somebody else, just so we could build the faith of people to know what kind of God we serve.
Well, he went into the ark, and he had been given instructions
Yes.
of what to do and who to take in the ark with him. First of all, it was his family. He had 3 sons. They were married, so he had 3 daughter-in-laws. He had a wife, so that was 8 persons, physical people that he had to take. Then he was also instructed to take animals. He was to take 2 of every kind, clean animals, 7 of every unclean animal into the ark with him. So can you imagine? He had horses and elephants and bears and giraffes and mice and frogs.
Well,
All
I've been
those
to a zoo. I can't imagine.
So he had all of those in there with him. But the thing about it is, even though he built that ark, he had no control, because normally if you build something, you control it and you take what goes in and you, but he had been given the instruction. After giving the instruction, and they were all in there, he didn't even have control over closing it. God shut the door, and in they were. So what was going on the outside, they didn't know. It was only one window, and the window was at the top. So it's not even where he could say, well, let me see if my cousin's outside and I can bring them in. Let me see if my friend's out there. None of that. So he had to follow the instructions that God had given him.
And I think that's going to be a critical point as we go along, because I think sometimes we start our journey with God, or we hear the voice of God, and we're really gung-ho, and we follow his instructions to the letter. And then something happens, and we find ourselves going back to doing things the same old, and we find ourselves falling away from that point and that mark that we established, especially in our lives with our families, because I heard you say how he took his whole family in, and his family saw Noah following and doing the will of God. Everything God said. Not only that, when he was in the ark, you said about the fact there was only one window at the top. And so that spoke to me about the fact that sometimes when we are in a place where God has taken away all the distractions out of our lives, it's really easy to stay focused.
True.
You know, it wasn't much that Noah could have gone astray. He couldn't even see, probably wasn't even tall enough to get to the top. So how God had taken the distractions away and kept him focused. And then what happened? Because he didn't stay in the ark. We've got to bring him up to date. So he didn't stay in the ark all that time. So what happened after a while?
After a while, the flood subsided, and Noah came on land, and after that, he was given the commandment to go and multiply, and that's what he did. And it's interesting to note, just as you were saying previously about he was in the ark and it was only 8 people, how it's interesting. He had to get along with those 8 people. And a lot of times God gives us a vision, but some follow because you say, but they don't necessarily have the vision that you have.
Right.
And that's key. So he got on dry land.
So
and-
I'm sorry, go stop a minute because you said something really interesting and it tweaked something
Yeah.
for me. You talked about the fact that everybody was in the ark
Mhm.
because they were being led by Father Noah.
Yeah.
And that sometimes people go along with the vision
Yes.
because they have to, but not because they're actually buying into it.
Right.
So I'm going back to what you said, Elder Trot, about the ark having all these animals. I'm thinking they must have been doing their normal bodily excretions all that time. So after a while, it probably was a big stench somewhere on that ark. I think that the bottom floor was the toilet, or I don't know. But so I'm thinking about how sometimes when somebody's going along because they have to, and then a stench arises. What that must do to them emotionally and psychologically. They may still go along, but that deep down inside of them, maybe there's a resentment building. I don't know. Imagine if somebody had you in an ark with all this stench. How would you feel?
And considering he was the only one that had a heart after God. He was the one that was faithful. So what was the standard of the other 7? So that in itself would breed contention, because this man's dragged me along, as you said, into an area, into this boat that's closed in. I'm here for 120 days, not to mention he was ridiculed before it was closed. May have begun to build some contention, and I know we're looking deeper into the scriptures by that, but all of that had to have developed in their quiet times and their quiet thoughts, and that stench could have quite possibly been the catalyst to what comes next.
Yeah, I know. I mean, y'all are just bringing up all sorts of juicy stuff because when you were talking about that and about the ridicule, I was thinking of people whose parents are preachers. And how they have to go along, and how sometimes they get ridiculed. I don't know, Elder Trot, if you want to just speak to, but maybe the only PK kid out there. Like, what is it like sometimes when you're being brought along by the standard of your parent, and even that is not
No
your
chance
standard?
to be you.
Yeah. What's that like?
Really, having thought about it for years, being a PK's kid is not the easiest one. There is a standard that you're expected by the public, by church members to live by. So really, you don't have a chance to be you. You have to live to this standard, even though you may not even understand what the standard is all about. But you have this standard. But then you get to a point in your life where you really want to be you. And in the back of your mind, it's saying, should I not? Should I not? And you go and you be this, as I would say, radical, because you're going to live against the standard that you're given. And you begin to feel within yourself, because of people's words, condemned. You feel ashamed. You feel that, oh, you're not worthy enough because you let down the standard, as it were. That was set by man, not by God. Because God, whether you're young, you're middle-aged, or you're old, God sets a standard for you where you are. God knows that we're all human. And he knows that once he's called you as an individual, that his standard can be lived through you if you follow him, not following people. So as a PK's kid growing up, it was very difficult at times. Sometimes I would say, well, I'm not going to be a PK's kid no more. I'm just going to run away and hide. And many times you felt like that. You felt like hiding because you could not, as a human being, live to that standard. And you tried. And even as I got older, I realized that, okay, there were things that I had done that were not pleasing. I mean, believe it or not, at the age I am, I think I drank once in my life. And that was because I was on a plane by myself and they were selling wine. And I said, oh, let me try that. but never had wine in my life, so I didn't know what it would taste like, but it wasn't a taste that I was used to. So therefore, having tasted it, it didn't really interest me. It wasn't something I would like. And then there was another area of sexual promiscuity. Yes, went there, done that. Thank God that where I went, the man is still in my life. It could have been otherwise. But God allowed me to know after that, after feeling, condemned, literally condemned, because the world is looking at me, the church is looking at me, people's looking at me. Family was, I didn't have a real opposition from the preacher herself. And for those of you that may not know, Reverend Dr. Dorothy Tuso is my mom. I didn't really have opposition from her, but those around. And it took me a long time in life to get over it, because people had said so many things. So it does. You have a standard to live up to that is not even yours. It's given to you.
I want to just float a balloon. We're going to come back to that balloon, this whole issue of condemnation. But right here and right now, I want to pause and speak to somebody that's listening, and you have been the child of a preacher, an evangelist, a missionary, some upstanding person in the church, and you find yourself living underneath the weight of their anointing and their gifting, and it's caused you to turn away from God and hate God and do all sorts of things. I want you to know today that this show is for you. God cares so much about you that he stopped by in 2014 to let you know that the power, his delivering power is able to come by, and it doesn't matter what you've done, that his blood still has miraculous healing power, hallelujah, to break every chain in your life. So we just want you to stay tuned. We want you to know that there is no longer any condemnation to you when you're in Christ Jesus, and all things will pass away and all things will become new. Just hang here with us and listen to the encouraging words as we continue to share. Right. So coming back to the panelists, because this is really getting hot. So I wanted us to say that part because I think sometimes when we look at the Bible stories, we don't make a connection.
Right.
It's our everyday life. And so Noah was a preacher. That's who he was. He was a preacher. And this child, this young man had been living for years underneath the auspices and the umbrella of this preacher. Yes. All the ridicule and everything. So I want just to get that out there so when we see what happened, we understand what might have been going on. Now we are using our understanding of human behavior. We're using our understanding of psychology and sociology because the Bible doesn't put everything in there, but there are some things that we understand about life and people that we're interjecting into the story to help you, our listeners, to understand what's going on. So we were at the point now, I think we were coming out of the ark. Sister Nancy was bringing us out after all that stench and all of that stuff. We were just getting ready to open the doors. Open the doors, Sister Nancy. Bring them out of the ark.
Okay, so what I find also interesting is that Noah had enough faith to know that when it was time, that he will come out.
Amen.
Because a lot of times we might go into something thinking, this is going to work. But when we're in it for a long period of time, because it wasn't just a couple of weeks, it wasn't just a month, it was some time he spent in there. And during that time, I would imagine he was in commune with God and, like we ought to be when we have our situations. And he came out and God brought him out, and he knew that.
So I'm going to hold you there again because you said something else, and maybe Sister Lene would like to speak to this, but you talked about the appointed time, and that there are seasons in all of our lives. Could you speak a bit about seasons? I might put you on the spot. Can you talk a bit about seasons? Because I believe that some people's seasons who's listening into this show is about to shift.
Sure.
And they have to understand that. Speak a bit about seasons and what it means to have different seasons in our lives.
There is a scripture in Ecclesiastes that talks about seasons, that there is a time for everything. And I can make it personal for my own self that my life has gone through so many different transitions, and I've said, yes, Lord. And after saying, yes, Lord, I said, oh, no, Lord. Because coming to Christ means that he's going to begin to do away with all of those old things. And and he takes you through seasons, literally in the natural as it is in the natural, so it is in the spiritual. So there are times where you have your summer months of where, you're wearing a winter jacket and because you're comfortable in that winter jacket. And all seasons come to an end though. So it's always temporary. Even at that moment, it feels like it's going to last forever. But I know as for myself, there are times I made permanent decisions based on a temporary circumstance. And I believe that that's where that's our downfall. At least it was mine, because I made life-changing decisions for a temporary circumstance.
So we hope you're listening out there in TV land, because we want you to know that whatever season you're in right now, you may be in a cold, isolated season where you're not feeling God because you didn't do everything, or you committed an act of sin, and now you feel separated from God and you've been in an isolated, cold season. God's just about to warm up your life. I just want you to know that. He's just about to set you free and let you know that the summer is coming. Flowers are about to bloom in your life. Praise the Lord. Purpose and destiny is about to be revived. Hallelujah. Why? Because we are here set by to let you know that whom the Son has set free will be free indeed. Praise the Lord. So now we're going back, Sister Nancy. This is so rich. You were talking about his season was up. I'm sorry you haven't gotten him out the ark. I promise to let you get him out of the ark. Go ahead, Sister Nancy.
Yes, so Noah is now out of the ark.
Amen.
And him and his family, I guess they set about to build, and it says here in the word where Noah was a planter, he was a farmer, and that tells me that he planted a vineyard, that he planted the grapes. And what we find interesting as we go on is that the grapes became wine. And he drank of the wine and in excess, because he said he was drunk. It's one thing just to have a sip or two, but it's another thing when we have access. We go beyond what we should do. Amen?
Amen. Talk about that, because it sounds like, okay, what he was tilling, what he had control over as a husband, Dan took control over him. You know? And how does that happen? This is we don't know this man of God who was wise and listening to the voice of God. And now, not only is he drunk, but what else was going on with him?
Well, it says here that he was so drunk that he was in his tent. I guess that's a good thing in a sense. But he was uncovered in his tent. And that's key, you know, because when you are taking a substance, it alters your mind. You don't have the ability to think like you normally would think. And in this situation, his mind had been altered. He was drunk, so he might have decided to go and sleep it off. And in doing that, he became uncovered in the natural.
And then in comes Ham. This boy who had been living in this stench, had been living under the shadow of his crazy daddy, was building a boat for rain that wasn't coming. And somebody else share with us what happened when Ham came in.
I want to speak to something before we move there. Because I think, certainly from my looking at this text, one of the things I thought was interesting was that the commentaries generally tend to suggest that this was the first time Noah became drunk. And I think that's significant, because I think that it doesn't matter whether in your life you have drunk in the past, but if you have, you know the results of it. You know that there are some decisions that you made after having drunk a little that you may, on reflection, wish you had not done. And so I think it's significant first to make the point that by the commentary, this is the first occasion that he's been successful in his vineyard, and he now actually takes of the fruit in a different way. And basically my upbringing was such to leave it alone, and so leaving it alone has a benefit, but of course never experiencing it has a circumstance that you sometimes always cannot explain. But I just wanted to make the point first and I'm reiterating, I know, that this was his first occasion of being drunk. So really, while we're going to speak to what happens next, and I think it's significant to actually make that point.
I think we won't even stay there and put to our
Yeah.
pastor, put a
Yes.
pin in that point. Because what is interesting as we bring it up and talk to in modern times, we have generations and we don't know what's happening with our fathers and our forefathers. So I will tell you that I know in my family, my dad was an alcoholic up until I was 5. Now, I don't know what my predisposition may be to consume alcohol. You know, I have thoughts of dancing on the table and waving my shoes without alcohol. So I'm thinking, right, that sometimes because of what's happened with our forefathers,
Yeah.
it's given us a propensity for something. And even though a few little drops, as Sister Nancy said, may not be an issue, because we don't know,
Yes.
and we do know that there are certain cells that generate, and you know, as our family drinks or if it's all smoking weed, and we know that it gets worse with each generation. So while my father, my great grandfather probably had moonshine, then my daddy had alcohol, then my brother came along and he did weed and cocaine, because it gets worse.
Yes.
With
It's a
each
progression.
generation. It's a progressive thing. So even in our community, when they're trying to talk about legalize marijuana and go buy it from the store, they're missing the point that this marijuana is a gateway to
Right.
addiction.
Yes.
And the more your family has a propensity towards addictive behaviors, the quicker it is and the most likely that you're going to be addicted, which the shop people won't be able to tell you because they don't know.
Yes. And can I speak to that point in that I too had a father who was an alcoholic and also a mother who drank often. And growing up, I thought I would never touch this stuff. And while I was limited in the alcohol consumption that I had, my addiction rose in something else.
Yes.
So there was still an addictive behavior. While it didn't show up in alcohol, it showed up in other things,
Exactly.
which helped to suppress the alcohol that I grew up in. So while it may not necessarily sometimes be a gateway where we always hear to another drug, it could be a gateway to another form of sexual sin or
Behavior.
what type of behavior that becomes perpetuated in your life and becomes a stronghold.
Yes.
Exactly. So Elder Fox, I thank you for bringing that up because even in other things, you heard people say, I only had sex once. I don't know where this baby came from. Because like you're saying, it only takes once for the devil to use that open opportunity to
Yes.
step into our lives
Sure.
and cause mayhem in our family.
Sure.
So that's where we're at the point where he took one drink, so they suggest, his first time, and now it's opened a gateway. And what happened from there, Elder Fox?
So I mean, the Bible doesn't speak about anybody else drinking, but it certainly speaks about Noah himself being so drunk that he collapses in a heap, uncovered, totally naked. Maybe he was feeling the heat, and so he was taking his clothes off. It would have been a new experience for him. We don't really know.
Right.
And one of his sons, Ham, is walking by the tent. I don't know if the tent door is open, but he certainly is able to look in, and he sees his father naked. Now, I think it's interesting because when you spoke earlier to this point of, you know, has anybody seen their parent, you know, but the uncovering really is more than just the nakedness, and that's what's interesting
Yes.
here. And so whenever we're in that situation, so in this case we're talking about a son seeing a father, but it could be a man seeing a woman in a compromising position. It could be a brother seeing his brother. It doesn't matter what the circumstance is, I think. The real issue is what do we do with that knowledge?
Yes.
Ham chooses an interesting choice of what to do in this situation.
And so we see that Ham goes in there and then he runs out and he says to brothers, hey, Daddy's in there naked, come see him. Or, you know, and of course, it's interesting as well. It's interesting how you can have 3 people come from the same loins and have totally different responses. And when we talk about the modern day application of this story, we're going to dwell into that a little bit more. But up come the other brothers, they hear this, and then they go and get a garment I just like this. You know me, I'm a romantic. So I think this is just a beautiful part. They go get a garment and they're like, we're going to see our naked daddy. And they walk backwards with the garment and they cover him. Now maybe y'all have never been uncovered, but I've been uncovered. And so the picture of somebody covering you is just like the most beautiful story ever.
Yes.
And they cover him.
Well, I think it's even more beautiful. It's interesting that the Bible took the time to say that they didn't look. Because the thing is, in many cases, whether we want to see something or not, after we've seen it, it's sometimes impossible to erase that. And so I just thought it was amazing that, that in this story, that level of detail is there. That, not only are they fixing the situation, but they recognize the importance that I don't want to be in the same Ham situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because it's something that you would not be able to erase from your mind.
And I think more so as a child, when you see certain things with parents, you're like, oh, I didn't realize that. They do that too, or they know that too, or they act that way too. Because as I was studying it, what interests me was when they said he was naked. Was he naked, meaning nothing on at all? Or was he just unclothed? Because we know back in the day, they wore layers. Now, how far down was he naked? So I began to look at that, and the commentary was saying that nakedness can also be an imperfection.
Yes.
So as children, when we see imperfections in our parents, when we feel that our parents are this perfect person, it can throw us into a quandary or tailspin that, oh, I didn't know my mama would do that. And if we all be honest and be true, when we go back into our families and we look at certain details and certain things that took place and do counting and do introspection as to what happens, oh, I see.
Well, sometimes you even say, oh, they're human.
Yeah, absolutely.
saying.
Thank God they're
You know,
human.
so therefore, even if in their messing up, they have allowed me to see that they are a human being. Because as children, I believe that sometimes we look at our parents in a totally different light. We look at them on this pedestal that's not going to come down.
Elder Truck, before you take us down to point 3, I'm going to stop you right there. You're taking us to point 3 and we haven't finished point 2. So you hold on to that thought a little bit more. But I want to go and talk again because I think between you and Elder Fox, you gave several definitions of uncovered. So we talked about being uncovered physically and the actual biological nakedness. Then you talked about being uncovered in terms of our humanness, in terms of our errors, in terms of mistakes that we make as people, and having those exposed. And I'm thinking, and this is not something that I've had a lot of time to work, but I believe that his own behavior caused him to be uncovered spiritually.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Spiritually.
Yes.
I would
Oh.
agree.
You know, and I want to speak again to people who are listening. There are a lot of people out there that are uncovered spiritually. You either have chosen for your own reason not to align yourself with a covering in church, or you've had a covering that hasn't done their covering for you. I just want to let you know that it's critical that you become covered. If you're not going to anybody's church, if you say you're worshiping at home on the TV, if you're out there doing your own ministry by yourself, we want to stop today and let you know from this story the importance of being covered. Spiritually, naturally. And that all of your vulnerability, sometimes when we're uncovered, we do unseemly things because we're not lined up. When Noah started out, he was lined up. He was hearing the voice of God. He was doing the voice of God. He had his family in order. Now, we see him out there manning the land, drinking of the wine. I don't see Noah in relationship with God anymore like he was. So when we become uncovered, we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. So if that's happened to you, that's okay. We're here today to bring understanding. That you just need to know, become covered. Because there's a covering that comes, there's a divine order that covers us, and that means we put God at the head, we have a spiritual leader, and then we come and bring our lives into subjection to God's will for us. Oh, if you're uncovered today, we invite you to please align yourself with God's will for your life and become covered.
Yes.
So, this is just wonderful. Now we got to move on because we've only got an hour. So we're going to now look at the spiritual significance, because after all this happened, Noah woke up, found out what his son had done, and he cursed him.
Yes.
Told him he's going to be a slave. What was some of the spiritual significance, as you wouldn't find it in its actual Genesis, but as you read Leviticus and other parts of the Old Testament, what was some of the spiritual significance to what he had done that made it so terrible?
There are scriptures that speak to honoring your father and mother. And in doing that, there's a natural order to ensuring that we always honor our parents. And as I was studying, there's a misconception. Children feel, well, my father did this or my mother did that, so I don't love them or they don't love me. But there's a higher purpose behind it. Part of the commentary online spoke to, in the natural, how we honor our presidents or we honor our premiers.
Yes.
That we don't know these people, but there's a honor based on protocol that we use to hold them at a standard. And so the same more so for our natural fathers and our mothers. And we actually put a curse on ourselves as a result of coming out of order.
That's correct. Not to them, but an order to the word of God.
Yes.
Coming out of misalignment
Yes.
with God's word that commands us
Yes.
to honor our parents. So that's one of the things. He came out of alignment with God's order.
Yes.
But there's another scripture in Leviticus, I don't know if anybody read about it, about all of the orders of how things should go, and they talked about, you shouldn't sleep with your daddy's wife, you shouldn't uncover your mama's nakedness, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't sleep with the sister of your mama, the sister of your dad. So there was also a lot of teaching, and in that time, a lot of cultural expectations about how you interacted with people. And even the priests, they talked about, when the priests went into the temple, that to make sure that they had on the skirts and the pantaloons and all that, because they couldn't show their nakedness
Yes.
before the people, and they couldn't show their nakedness before God. And if the priests did that, they would die. So God was really serious about this whole issue of being naked in this sense.
Yeah.
Now there are some other ways that you can be naked and not ashamed before God. And when we come to, I think it's week 3, we're going to talk about the nudist camp and what it was like to be naked before God in the garden, and how wonderful it was to run around without no clothes on before God.
Yeah.
But in this context, it was a curse to show nakedness. So even though Noah had done something wrong, he exacerbated it by exposing Noah's wrong.
Yes.
Okay, so we wanted to speak to that if one, God commands us to honor our parents. That was one of the reasons why this situation was such a gas. And the second thing was that the scripture spoke discreetly and specifically to the whole issue of how you handle interactions with parents and relatives and things of that sort.
But I just wanted to just say, when you said parents, but I'm sure you also mean that really anybody in authority.
Yes.
Anytime we're,
Yes.
right, anytime we're,
Now you have to be careful when you go through commentaries and stuff, because it was a part of it, one of them that was quite strange, and was online, and it talked about that it meant that because there's a definition for uncovering your nakedness that talks about having intimacy
Yes.
with another person.
Yeah.
And it tried to allude to the fact that this boy had intimacy with his daddy.
Or with his father's wife.
Or into his father's wife.